This Tuesday night, an enormous explosion blasts through Beirut. The destruction, the mass casualties, and the search for the cause. Also tonight, pandemic prediction. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer on how much longer our new reality could last. Moving beyond calorie counting.
What we've done up until this point hasn't worked.
The new guidelines on treating obesity and why it should be considered a chronic disease. And a medical diagnosis more than 70 million years in the making. What dinosaurs and humans have in common.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
The destruction is overwhelming. This is the port in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Rubble everywhere. Buildings blasted open. Vehicles flipped and smashed. Those caught in it, those who survived, dazed and bloody. Hospitals already struggling to cope with COVID-19, now flooded with so many blast victims, some are being treated outside. Officials say at least 78 people are known to have died and almost 4,000 are injured. The Red Cross has put out an urgent appeal for blood donors. Lebanon has a history of conflict and of bombings, but the scale of this is like nothing else. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The massive explosion was so powerful, the shock wave was felt hundreds of kilometers away. Lebanon's internal security chief says it happened in an area in the port that housed highly explosive materials. The cause is not clear yet, but as Crystal Gamansing reports, the damage certainly is.
The massive plume of black smoke rising up over the port, impossible to miss. Mixed into that smoke, flashes of light believed to be fireworks going off. Even those in cars during the evening rush hour grabbed their phones to record the dramatic scene. But no one was prepared for what came next. An explosion so powerful, shockwaves were reportedly felt clear across the Mediterranean in Cyprus.
The glass shattered all over the cars around us, the buildings, all the glass just went down. It was raining glass all over the city of Beirut.
Images show buildings far from the explosion site destroyed. Many people were caught on the roads, unsure of what to do next. My car's down there, he says. It rolled over. I think this injury was because of the glass. Lebanon's prime minister said the nation is suffering and called on friendly neighboring countries for support. Faced with a major economic crisis and the strain of the COVID-19 pandemic, Lebanon's health system is itself ailing and now struggling to keep up with the thousands of injured people caught up in the explosion. This woman says we thought it was a container in the port that was on fire and they weren't able to put it out. A few seconds later, we were flying through the air. Exactly what happened is unknown. One security official says the source of the blast was a building at the port where explosive material was kept. Wednesday has been declared a national day of mourning. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
It's not clear if there are any Canadians among the victims, though we know that nearly 11,000 Canadians are registered as being in Lebanon. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has offered Canada's support to the country, tweeting absolutely tragic news coming out of Beirut. Canadians are thinking of everyone who has been injured and all those who are trying to locate a friend or family member or who have lost a loved one. We're keeping you in our thoughts and we stand ready to assist in any way we can. And Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister tweeted, tragic news out of Beirut today. Canada is closely monitoring the situation. Our hearts are with the victims and their families. We stand with the people of Lebanon and the diaspora during this difficult time, and we are ready to assist however we can. He urged any Canadians in need of emergency consular assistance to contact the government. Before this explosion, Lebanon was already crippled by the worst economic crisis in years. Decades of political mismanagement, corruption, and overspending have accelerated in recent months to the point of economic collapse. The Lebanese pound has lost 80% of its value since last October. Pandemic restrictions have led to job losses, poverty, and despair. Unemployment is at 32%. Many parts of Lebanon only get 2 or 3 hours of electricity a day. Bread, a staple of the Lebanese diet, is in short supply because the government can't fund imports of wheat. The charity Save the Children estimates more than 900,000 people living in and around Beirut do not have enough money to buy food. And talks with the IMF about a $10 billion bailout stalled in July. Shifting now to the COVID-19 crisis, there's a new warning about the ripple effects of the pandemic. The United Nations says the world faces what it calls a generational catastrophe in education, and it says countries must make reopening schools safely a top priority. According to the UN, as of mid-July, schools in more than 160 countries were closed, more than 1 billion students were affected, and at least 40 million children have missed out on preschool. The UN says it's the largest disruption in education in modern history, and it could undermine decades of progress.
We are at a defining moment for the world's children and young people. Once local transmission of COVID-19 is under control, getting students back into schools and learning institutions as safely as possible must be a top priority.
The World Health Organization is warning Russia to proceed with caution after it announced mass production of a COVID-19 vaccine will begin this fall. Russia claims it's on the cusp of a vaccine for COVID-19, though there are widespread reports scientists rushed through tests and injected themselves with the prototype to speed up the process. The WHO urged Russia to follow established guidelines for safe and effective vaccine development. It says 6 candidates have progressed to phase 3 levels of testing. The Russian vaccine is still in phase 1. Here at home, Canada's top doctor is trying to temper expectations about a vaccine. Dr. Theresa Tam says even if an effective vaccine is developed, it won't be widely available immediately, and it won't mean a quick return to normal. As Mike Couture reports, Tam says Canadians should get used to the idea of living with restrictions like physical distancing and masks for several more years.
It's likely that there won't be enough vaccines for the population as the vaccine rolls out.
A sobering statement from Canada's chief public health officers as a number of vaccines show significant promise in stage 3 of development. And Dr. Theresa Tam followed that up with another dose of reality.
We're planning as a public health community that we're going to have to manage this pandemic, certainly over the next year, but certainly maybe planning for the longer term of the next 2 to 3 years.
Not what weary Canadians want to hear as they long for a sense of normal to return, be it patios or restaurants fully reopening.
Complacency is probably one of our most dangerous aspects to our management of the virus and to our response.
That's why physical distancing and wearing a mask will continue to be important to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Now, that advice hasn't changed in recent weeks, but Alberta is changing its stance on masks for school kids, now saying it will be mandatory for all children grade 4 and up when they head back this fall.
The current evidence indicates that the older a child is, the more similar their transmission may be to adults. And that's, again, the reason why we've had the grade 4 as this cutoff.
Health officials say wearing masks and other safety measures need to be seen as layers of protection to help contain a virus we're still learning about. The COVID-19 Alert app is supposed to be another layer, but it also appears to have limitations.
Some phones are too old and cannot adopt this app, and ironically, the people who are most likely to need it cannot access it. So it's incumbent upon the app developers to find a solution.
Dr. Theresa Tam echoed that sentiment, but still hopes as many people as possible will download it to help increase its success, saying it's one of many tools public health officials are using in the fight against COVID-19. Mike Couture, Global News, Ottawa.
And you can find more on Canada's long-term plans, including back to school, on our website. Some parents are forming pandemic pods in order to keep homeschooling their kids. That's at globalnews.ca/globalnational. The American president has further complicated questions about the Chinese-owned app TikTok. Donald Trump, who said he might ban TikTok, now says the U.S. Treasury should get a cut if an American firm takes over the app. The Chinese government is not happy about his threats. An editorial in the state-backed website China Daily called the plan a smash and grab and said the country will by no means accept the theft of a Chinese technology company. President Trump threatened first that he'd shut down TikTok in the U.S., then offered a 45-day reprieve to allow Microsoft to purchase the app from its Chinese parent company. The Trump administration is concerned about Chinese authorities accessing data of TikTok users, something the company denies. On the American East Coast tonight, tropical storm Isaias continues to pack a huge punch. It made landfall in North Carolina's coastline as a hurricane, and it's since been downgraded, but the storm has spawned tornadoes. It has now moved through Philadelphia, dumping heavy rain and winds of over 100 kilometers an hour. That downed trees and power lines and caused storm surges. 4 people have been killed, and there are fears that number could rise. One tornado hit this mobile home park in North Carolina, and there are also reports of tornadoes in New Jersey and Delaware. In South Korea, monsoon rains have drenched that country for 42 days now, the longest spell in 7 years. That's caused flooding that's forced 1,000 people to flee their homes, and at least 14 people have been killed, including 3 members of the same family from New Zealand. A woman, her daughter, and her 3-year-old grandson were found dead after a landslide hit vacation homes near Seoul. Overhauling the approach to treating obesity, coming up, the updated guidelines that go way beyond counting calories. Plus, seedy mystery, the unusual mail turning up across Canada and around the world. Also washed up on a desert island, the survival story of 3 stranded sailors. There's a big change coming to the way doctors in this country diagnose and treat obesity, and experts in the field say it's about time. New guidelines published today in the Canadian Medical Association Journal reflect substantial advances in the assessment and treatment of obesity and shift the focus toward improving health outcomes rather than weight loss alone. It's much more complex than just counting calories and getting more exercise. Experts say obesity is a complex chronic disease. And as Mike Drolet explains, the sooner that's recognized, the more people can be helped.
What's the best way to reduce? Eat plenty or starve yourself?
For as long as we've had ads, weight loss miracles have appeared to be just a pill away.
And these yummy low-carb bars.
Fad diets have come and gone, yet chronic obesity rates are rising.
What we've done up until this point hasn't worked. We've tried and tried and tried for years to shame and blame people into losing weight.
Ian Patton is one of those people. Before undergoing bariatric surgery 6 years ago, his heaviest weight was 360 pounds. Counting calories and dieting didn't work for him. And as someone who is researching obesity for his PhD, he knew what he was talking about.
So it was a bit weird for me because as I was going through and doing my PhD and going to conferences and stuff and talking, trying to lecture about obesity, I was standing there at my absolute biggest and sickest.
Until now, the Canadian guidelines have had doctors using BMI or body mass index as a way to calculate obesity, except BMI is deeply flawed because it only takes into account height and weight, ignoring everything that makes us unique, like muscle mass, race, and sex. For me to be considered healthy on the BMI scale, I'd have to lose 80 to 100 pounds. The new guidelines completely rethink how we address obesity. Counting calories has been replaced by a more detailed medical approach. There are now 3 pillars to treat obesity: weight loss medication, bariatric surgery, and cognitive behavioral therapy, which addresses the reasons behind a patient's weight gain. They're also declaring obesity a chronic relapsing disease, which the Canadian government has so far refused to do, and is critical for the way it's treated.
Any approach to obesity has to be a long-term approach in the same way that other chronic diseases have to have long-term approaches. So there are no quick fixes, and hopefully the guidelines are going to get more people to realize this.
And ultimately get more Canadians the medical help they need. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
CD deliveries rooting out the mystery of these unsolicited packages. Those packages of mysterious seeds people in countries around the world, including Canada, the U.S., and the UK, have received in the mail are still a mystery. They're arriving unsolicited in people's mailboxes. Most appear to be from China in packages that are mislabeled. A U.S. federal agency has identified some of the seeds as a mix of ornamental, fruit and vegetable, and herb and weed species, but they warn no one should plant them. As Sarah McDonald reports, no one knows who is sending them or why.
There's something seedy cropping up in mailboxes across North America.
There's like little grass seeds in there.
And nobody seems to know exactly what's behind the unrelenting, unsolicited deliveries, landing on the doorsteps of thousands of unsuspecting people, like Natalie Dempsey of Alberta.
I didn't know where it came from specifically, and I thought it was very suspicious, very odd.
It's odd and highly suspect to officials on both sides of the border, too, with almost every province and most states reporting residents receiving packages containing mystery seeds. The small packets may look harmless, but experts warn this could be a scam or invasive species.
We're not at the point that we can confirm anything yet. Of course, we are concerned.
The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is urging citizens who receive unauthorized shipments like this to report it to their regional office. And while federal officials won't elaborate on the suspected origin of the packets, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration says most south of the border appear to be coming from China. If you find yourself on the receiving end of suspicious seeds, don't handle them, don't dispose of or compost them, and most importantly, don't plant them.
They're a high-risk species for us because we don't know what they're there. And from what we've seen, there are actually quite a variety of seeds that have come in.
As scientists work to dig up not only what the seeds consist of, but any substance they could be coated with, officials are investigating the intent of the senders.
This is the package. It says it has jewelry.
Who often deceive customs officials and recipients through mislabeling potentially malicious deliveries as everyday items.
To have these mystery seeds being sent out, who knows? A little bizarre.
With the seeds that should never sprout, already planting lingering questions. Sarah McDonald, Global News, Vancouver.
Next, the prehistoric patient behind the world's oldest known case of cancer. This story of survival sounds like the stuff of fiction. 3 sailors have been found after they were marooned on a tiny remote island in the Pacific Ocean. The men were spotted because they wrote a giant SOS on a sandy beach. Military aircraft from the U.S. and Australia had been searching for them and spotted it. They were stranded on a tiny island in Micronesia for 3 days after their 7-meter skiff ran out of fuel and drifted way off course. The Australian Defence Forces dropped off food and water for the men, and a Micronesian patrol boat is coming to get them. In an historic, or you could say prehistoric first, a dinosaur has been diagnosed with cancer. A team of Canadian researchers found evidence of bone cancer on a 76-million-year-old fossil. It's the same type of cancer that still affects some people today, especially children and young adults. Heather Urix-West explains.
Osteosarcoma was the cancer that inspired Terry Fox to run his Marathon of Hope. The aggressive bone cancer also ultimately cost him his life.
These cancers are most common in adolescents and young adults. They occur most commonly in the second decade of life.
Young adults are at an increased risk of this cancer because of how quickly their bones grow. It's something they have in common with these prehistoric beasts. Dinosaurs had to grow a lot to reach full size, and now Canadian scientists have proof these animals suffered from osteosarcomas as well.
This bone was discovered more than 25 years ago, and it was actually in storage in the Royal Tyrrell Museum, which is located in Drumheller, Alberta.
The bone's unusual appearance was first thought to be because of a break, but after CT scans and a microscopic examination, the world's first dinosaur cancer diagnosis was made. The aggressive osteosarcoma tumor was believed to be present throughout much of the bone. The lower leg bone belonged to a Centrosaurus, a horned dinosaur that lived in what is now southern Alberta 76 million years ago.
It would have likely been in a fair bit of pain. It would have probably been able to move around, but not at its full speed like normal. And it's possible that it would have spread to other organs by that point.
Cancer isn't what killed the animal. Researchers believe it drowned along with hundreds of other members of its herd. But knowing the Centrosaurus had cancer shows us this disease has been a part of life and death for a very long time.
One of the things that makes it so difficult to battle is the fact that at the core of it, it's written into the cell biology and the cell life cycle. And that's part of what makes it so ancient, but also perhaps so difficult to overcome.
In the decades since Terry Fox's run, treatment advances have meant people with osteosarcoma today face a 70 to 80% chance of surviving more than 5 years, likely much better odds than a Centrosaurus would have had. Heather Urix West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the research ship Namao, docked in Gimli on Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to us. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Twitter has temporarily restricted President Donald Trump's campaign team from tweeting. It was in response to a video of a Fox News interview with Trump where he made false claims about COVID-19. Links to the tweet now arrive at this page. Twitter says the post violated its rules on COVID-19 misinformation, and the owner must remove it before they can tweet again. The campaign appears to have complied. Hours earlier, Facebook also removed the same video from President Trump's main page. It was the first time that Facebook removed one of Trump's videos. Mike Hanna has more from Washington, D.C.
Well, President Trump stated in that phone interview with Fox Television, that children are almost immune from COVID-19, or virtually immune, he said as well, at a different stage. Now, this is clearly and patently false. The Centers for Disease Research, the CDC, says that some 250,000 children have contracted coronavirus, and at least 6 have actually died of an acute inflammatory situation stemming directly from COVID. So this is clearly incorrect. But what has got to be looked at as well is the context that President Trump has used this phrase, virtually immune. He has done it before in public on a number of occasions, and the context is his absolute insistence that schools must open in the US in their entirety. He does not want virtual education. He wants all the classes to open at the beginning of the new school year, because he argues the economy cannot revive unless children are back in school, freeing their parents to go to work. So this is the context of these repeated falsehoods being made by President Trump with regard to children and COVID-19.
Rob Pecoraro is a freelance tech writer. Now, he believes the pandemic is playing a part in changing Facebook's approach.
We're up to 157,000 Americans dead from this disease. That's part of it. I think also Facebook, historically, over the last few years, we've seen they do not want to upset too many people around the president, to the extent where a very pro-Trump but inaccurate news source like Breitbart does not get banned, does not get blocked, gets a privileged spot in the Facebook News tab on their mobile app. And they have gotten a lot of criticism, including from a lot of Facebook employees who are not happy with the way Facebook has tried not to give offense to the president and his supporters. It is a business. Advertisers don't want to be in a place that I would assume that having a site overrun with conspiracy theories would not make it advertiser friendly. I don't think this is going to draw too many people away from Facebook. The complaints people have about it, I was just writing about a survey the other day of customer satisfaction where the #1 complaint was privacy, not is Facebook mean to conservatives or not. It is definitely true that some of the same people in that House committee hearing who accused Zuckerberg of and the other executives of being biased against Republican voices will have another talking point, even though actual evidence of that bias, I haven't seen it. Trump seems to have done very well using Facebook as a megaphone. He certainly has an immensely large audience there.
Think of Lebanon and you might think of its beauty, its beaches, the bars and nightlife of Beirut. Or you might think of war, destruction and crisis after crisis. It's a small and complex country with a big heart and some very, very big problems. To understand the problem, first look at its location. Hemmed in by Israel and Syria, but also looking west across the Mediterranean. Then look at its people, 18 officially recognised religious sects. Power split between Christians and Muslims along sectarian lines. They're dangerous fault lines. For 15 years, between 1975 and 1990, Lebanon tore itself apart.
Tens of thousands packed the roads out of the city to escape the carnage of continuous, indiscriminate shelling.
Beirut became a byword for lawlessness and fear. Warlords and militias ruled the streets. After the war, Lebanon emerged phoenix-like from the ashes, and it became a magnet for investment. But behind the shiny new buildings, the same warlords and their clans remained in power, dominating the government and the economy and basically milking the country dry. And Lebanon's stability hasn't been helped by the Shia militant group Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran and by Syria. It's part of the government and it's in constant tension with Israel and the West, so the West wasn't going to rush in when the economic bubble burst. Street protests broke out when the government tried to raise revenue with new taxes last October. Since then, the economy and the Lebanese currency have been in free fall. People have become desperate, even hungry, and furious at power cuts and a general lack of basic services. And then on top of all of that came coronavirus. Lebanon was on its knees before nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate exploded with such horrifying effect. And people are already blaming their corrupt and incompetent leaders.